Hi everyone, it's Brittany from Endeavor's Help Desk here on the GP side. Got me thinking this morning. I was talking to my dad and he was asking me, am I ready for the holidays? I'm so not ready for the holidays. But it got me thinking, I am ready to talk about GP year end, which generally happens around the holidays. So I thought, why don't we go take a peek together at something I know I'm ready for, and maybe we just don't tell my dad I'm not ready for the holidays yet. So first things first, a little bit of housekeeping. I am currently in GP as SA. We know SA is GP's database administrator. It has elevated functions. No, you do not need to be SA to close a year in GP. However, it might help you out with some of the tasks around it. So you might need to contact your internal IT to help you out with your SA password, and some other housekeeping functions we'll go through. First things first, when we start our year end, we don't want any other users inside of GP. We don't want transactions to be moving. We don't want any transactions to be posting. We want a very stale environment to be happening when we close our GP year end. So you might say, do I have to go to every user and make sure they're out? No. We do have the ability inside of GP to see who is logged in and remove them or kick them out, so to say. This is actually underneath our administration, utilities, and user activity. Now, you will need to know your system password for this, and I just typed this incorrectly. You will need to know your system password to get in here. If you don't know your system password, you are going to have to chat with your IT and make sure that they are available to be with you to put in that system password. Now, once we're in here, we can see all the users logged in. As you can see, I'm the only user logged in here right now, which makes me very happy, but that may not happen for you. So if you see any users you don't want in there, you can go ahead and highlight them and hit delete, and that will remove them from GP at this point in time. Okay? Now, users can be in other company databases when you're closing the year, but not in the one you're currently closing the year. Once we make sure all of our users are out and it's just us inside there, we want to make sure that we take an ad hoc database backup of the company we are closing. Now, a quick way to know what your database name is of your GP, if you go to Tools, Setup, Company, and Company, that actually hides up here in this company setup. This little company ID here is going to be the database name you want to back up inside of GP. Okay. Now, next thing we want to make sure that we have is a new fiscal year set up. Now, you probably already have one because we're into the new year or we're getting out close to the new year, but in case you don't, let's go make sure we have a new fiscal year. So that's actually underneath our tools, setup, in the company, and fiscal periods. As you can see here, I have all my historical years and I have future years here. If you don't have your future years set up, you're going to have to create your next year. Okay? Now, the new year you're going into, you probably don't want it looking like this where you have all of them open at the same time, or maybe you do. I like to keep my periods closed nice and tight, but for this, I left them all open so we can go take a peek. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is our GL accounts. We want to make sure that those are nice and clean before we start this. And you might say to me, why? Does it really matter? Yes, parts of it really does matter. And the biggest part that does matter is this posting type you see here. Because depending on whether you have balance sheet or profit and loss selected, it's going to change how that account behaves when you do your financial year-end close. If you've selected balance sheet, it's going to do a BBF entry or beginning balance forward entry. It's going to roll those balances forward into the new year. If it is set to profit and loss, it is of course going to roll it all together and make a giant entry to your retained earnings and start with the zero balance starting the next year. Now you might say to me, Brittany, I definitely don't want to go through every single screen of these accounts to go find out to make sure that they're balance sheet or profit and loss. I'm with you. I don't want to do that either. This is where our smart list or smart view comes really handy. I'm just going to drag this down a little. In our financial, underneath accounts, I like to just use the star one here. Now, I have 519 accounts. It's a pretty small chart of accounts. Some of you might have very large chart of accounts, and that's okay. Now, In mine, I'm following a very traditional setup where my natural account or my main GL account is my second or middle segment, and I'm following that 1,000 to 3,999 is balance sheet and 4,000 and below is income statement. So we can have our search criteria help us out on this one, where if we go inside of our search and we put in, you may not find everything you actually want here. If you move this to all columns, you will be able to see all of the columns you can want to search by. So we can make this go like this, where it's in between 1,000 to 3,999. Oops. And I also want to make sure that the posting type, oops, let's go up a little. Our posting type is equal to profit and loss. We're going to see if any of our accounts fall the wrong way around. Of course, I have 0, and we're going to do that in reverse, of course, for the profit and loss. Once we make sure all of our accounts are set the way we can, we're going to move forward a little bit to make sure we have our general ledger set up the way we want for a financial year-end close. Now that's actually underneath our financial section under setup, under general ledger. And there's a few things we want to talk about inside of here. First of all, make sure your maintain history is always selected for accounts and transactions. This is to make sure that all of your individual journal entries are going to show up inside of your summary when you look inside of those summary inquiries. The other part we want to make sure is that we have the right retained earnings account set up here. If this is not the correct retained earnings account you want set up here, then please fill in with the correct one. The other part is you can use a divisional close. You might say to me, I don't use divisions. You might. Is if you have a natural or natural GL account here, that's your retained earnings, but maybe you want a separate one going by the first segment or the last segment, we can choose to do a divisional close and you choose another segment that it will rotate to. Now in this case, I don't want a divisional close. If you do want a divisional close and you want some more information from me, please feel free to reach out. We're here to help you out with that. So now that we make sure everything here is set up, we're good to go. We can go ahead and do that GL close. Now, you might say to me, where is my GL close? That is a great question. It is actually under our routines and it's in this year-end closing. It will tell you on the bottom here the last time this closed. So the last time I closed it was December 31st of this year. The retained earnings account I'm closing to, so it gives you one last chance to take a peek at it. The next journal entry number, okay? And of course, we can remove unused segments or maintain inactive accounts. These are all of our choices. If you have any questions about these, feel free to let us know and contact us. We can go ahead and hit the close year. Now, don't panic if this takes a while. I've seen year-end closes go anywhere from 2 minutes, they're zippity quick, to 3 or 4 hours for it to close. The amount of time it takes for the year-end close to close is really dependent on how many journal entries you posted throughout the year. Because in the background, what GP is doing is it's moving all of your journal entries that you have done throughout the year, no matter where they came from, whether they came from sales or purchasing or inventory, any of the transactions are moving from your open table into what we call a historical table. So it's moving huge amounts of data from an open table to a historical table. So don't panic if it does take a long time. Don't shut it down. Don't force shut it down. Let it continue on. Keep going. When it is done, it'll give out a report. And I'm actually going to close this year so you can take a peek. It is telling me I have a batch open. Make sure you have no journal entries unposted before you do this. So you'll know what's done when you get a report that comes out. That is your year-end closing report. Now, one thing to note about this. If you are doing a full audit, this report is not reprintable in GP. This is the only time it comes out, so save it somewhere handy. I usually like to keep a year-end closing folder, throw it in there, put it in. You should be good. Now that is your financial year-end close. I always like to double check my last check. I like to pick on a cash account because In theory, they should always have something in there, but you can pick any balance sheet account really, and make sure that you have your opening balances set forward. Oops. Inside of here, that you have an opening balance going in there. I like to pick a few key accounts. You'll know best of what are your key accounts. But what does sales and purchasing's year-end do? It's a great question. You'll always notice in any of the Microsoft verbiage that it talks about year-end closes inside of sales and purchasing. Now, we can find those inside of our routines just like we do, and we have our year-end close. And you might think, what does it do? It actually does the calculations for us inside of these inquiry windows for these yearly summaries where we get our last year. However, a common misconception is that it backdates. It does not. It runs it as of this minute, this second, so it will include all of your sales done since the last close. So if you're closing, let's say, middle through January or after on, and you have some January transactions mixed with December transactions, those January transactions that are already posted will be included in part of these yearly summaries. If you do not have a really tight close, it's not necessary for you to do the sales year-end close unless you are actively using these last year numbers. And if you do want to still use these, we can do some reporting that goes around this. Now you might say, what about purchasing? Purchasing is very similar to sales in this aspect that we have underneath our routines. We have that year-end close, and it does update our yearly summary for our vendor for our year-to-date numbers. Again, common misconception is that GP will backdate. GP will not backdate for this. It will close purchasing just like sales as of this minute. So if you have other periods or other years posted since your last close, it will include those numbers in there. So you need to have a very tight close to use the sales and purchasing. But you might say to me, that's only sales and purchasing. What about inventory? Great question. The year-end close is not necessary for inventory as well unless you are using standard cost. If you are using standard cost, you do have the update item standard cost. Now this could be what you want to happen. It does not. It does alter the standard cost calculation. If you want some more information on this, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk about it.
Well, thank you, Brittany, for that wonderful overview. For further tips and troubleshooting for year-end close, please contact our GP support desk. That's support@gpsupportnorth.com. Well, have a happy end-year close